I did not plan this to coincide with the Fantastic Four trailer coming out featuring a Fantastic car. I actually planned this over a month in advance, and this whole episode will actually come out almost a month after we recorded. And yet, we're going to be looking at what I consider the most advanced car built in the 1950s. Today, we're talking about the Golden Sahara 1 and 2. So, before we get too deep, I just want to check in. Our benefactor, Illinois Jackson, famously crashed his plane, and we just want to check in. So I have let me just dial him up. Hey, Illinois, how are you doing, man? How's your stay at the hospital been so far? How would you describe it, man?
Meanness, lies, hatred, harm.
Okay, we'll get better soon. So, this actually started with me investigating the tires on this car, only to find out that the tires weren't even the most interesting part of it. This will actually connect to our prior episode about the Batmobiles, because the Golden Sahara 1 was built by George Barris in 1954. George Barris is the man who created the Adam West Batmobile roughly 10 years after this.
Okay.
This is the origin story of him becoming a custom automaker as well, because he'd just gotten what was functionally a brand new car. And he got into an accident with a flatbed truck hauling hay, and it totally scooped off the top of the car and it ruined the doors. The metal frame itself, they were built like bathtubs, like they're huge. So it was okay-ish. And at the time, you can't just order replacement parts for a brand new car. So he has to manufacture his own. Well, if he has to manufacture his own, why doesn't he make it look cooler? So if you're looking at this Golden Sahara, and I'm going to try to do my best to describe it for the audio-only listeners.
I'm looking at a photo right now of it.
Yeah, it is a pearlescent white and gold 1950s, classic muscle car look. It has futuristic, almost like pylons sticking out of the front. It has a crazy dome top, like a cockpit, that looks very much like the Batmobile later would. It is, the paint is not just pearlescent, it literally has fish scales in it to make it reflective.
Jeez.
It has legitimate gold-plated detail work all over the exterior and the interior. The interior is lined with white mink fur.
Jeez.
And it can be driven via use of a very futuristic-looking steering wheel, which looks, frankly, it's what they based Han Solo's car in Solo off of with his steering wheel. It looks like almost like a pilot would fly it. But at the same time, you could fly it by removing the entire driving, wheel and the stock that goes into the car and drive it purely with a joystick that allowed you to go forward, backwards, left, and right.
Odd.
So it was originally built by George Barris, as I said, but it was really just the exterior work that's done. He was a body man, and this was one of his first pieces of work on that. And I didn't make the connection because I actually did the research for these things out of order. So I didn't connect when we were talking about George Barris in the Batman episode that this was that George Barris.
Wait, does it have a big center red button?
So the thing you're seeing in the center is a tape-to-tape deck reel for music, because where the radio should be is a black and white television. There's no more room for the watch.
And the steering, I'm not calling it a wheel.
It's a steering yoke.
It's like where the steering wheel should be. It splits off into a Y, and each end of the Y has two vertical handles, basically.
And at the base of it, you can click a button and remove it, and it comes out, and you can drive. Also, really unique for it is that there's a bunch of dials and toggles on the front dash where the speedometer would be now, because the speedometer is actually up above the TV in the center there. And it allows you to fine-tune the electrical components to increase or slow down the responsiveness of certain things to tune it to your driving style. George Barris was commissioned by and then sold the car to Jim Street, who would go on to give it the technological amenities that we know now.
Yeah.
Including the ability to drive it by voice. So let's start from the top here. The Golden Sahara 2, as it was christened when they added all of the cool techno babble, was built in 1958. Fish scale pearl paint, equipped with a radar braking system in the front. Those pylons don't actually work. The radar system was kind of boring and ugly, so they just put those on there so that people would know it has active radar, and it legitimately did like, oh, there's something in front of us, and it hits the brakes for you, like a modern automatic braking system.
What a weird...
The only issue they had was when you're traveling at a certain speed, the rudimentary computer system's computation speeds, it wouldn't know to hit the brakes quick enough if you were like on the freeway. It's still super incredible. For context, Dwight D. Eisenhower is president while this is happening.
Jeez.
It's a phenomenally different time.
So, yeah, like what year did you say? So?
Originally 1954, turned into the Golden Sahara 2 in 1958 by Jim Street.
Wow. So that is...
It was, okay, it has electric automatic doors with a hidden button on the front that you press, hidden in like that golden filigree that pops the door open for you.
It's like, it's insane to think that like...
It inspired the Batmobile, and then the gadgets that were added on throughout its touring were inspired then by the fictional gadgets in the Batmobile. So George Barris is both the blueprint in its inception.
So you were actively seeing art imitate life and life imitate art.
And all of it circling back to George Barris. Yeah, which is... I think phenomenally cool.
I would totally watch the biopic of this guy.
I think this car is cooler than the Batmobile, even with all the fictional amenities in the Adam West show. And I thought that was a pretty cool car. Yeah, it had voice-controlled steering through a microphone, so you could say forward, left, or right, or you could use a remote control to press buttons, and it actually had a TV transponder in the trunk that would interpret your button commands, and that's literally how they made it then trigger forward, left, right, backwards.
Weird.
It debuted on a TV show where he walked out with a remote and just pressed buttons because the applause was too loud, and just remote controlled his car driving alongside him. It's very Tony Stark Expo, the car of the future.
Yeah.
Or I guess Howard Stark Expo. Yeah, the onboard computer translated commands to steering controls, had a facade on the front.
Can I just say, I know, like, we brought the Fantastic car and the...
Yeah.
It's so fake considering Jack Kirby, like, loved that futuristic stuff, and this would have been sort of near the time, or, like, that sort of, like, the retro-futuristic stuff that he loved.
Yeah, no, you know that he would have loved this.
Like, he was a bigger sci-fi fan than he was a superhero fan.
And he was a bigger monster fan than a fan of both.
And so...
And a World War II hero and infantryman.
Yes. And... he smoked a good cigar. Yeah.
So it could shoot flames out of its tail.
I'm sorry. No, what?
The car, not Jack Kirby.
What? Why?
Because it looks cool, which then would inspire what the Batmobile could do on the TV show.
That's such
It's not actually the exhaust. There was an internal combustion thing.
I didn't think it was exhaust. I'm pretty sure I was imagining the correct thing, that he stuck a flamethrower on the back of his car.
Well, it wasn't a flamethrower, but yeah, functionally you're correct.
Yes.
So it had a TV, it had a radio, it had a cassette deck with full-size tape before, like, cassette players were small. And this is still the time where records are kind of like, vinyl isn't just hipsters, it's the way you listen to music.
Yeah.
It had all of the brains that operated all of this were in the trunk. It had radar brakes, which almost became the standard on all Packard cars in 1958, except for the computational speeds that it couldn't catch up with. It had an internal backup charger in case any of your technology died off, like if you drained power in a specific system because you overcranked it or you left it idling too long, what have you. It had a whole second battery, and you could charge it off of 12 volts, like the whole car. It featured a liquid urethane custom tire. The original car, since it had colored rubber, had white lights on the inside that would glow while you drove, which was actually something Goodyear had been doing for a while for concept cars, so that when these concept cars wouldn't just show up at one show, they would tour the country, and they would draw attention. Even at night in, like, the fairgrounds, you see these glowing cars, you come up and you look at their features. So it wasn't the only time, but this one became most famous for it. And it has a really crazy story. So obviously George Barris makes it, Jim Street buys it, upgrades it, but at some point after, I think, 6 to 10 years of touring, Goodyear says they're no longer making these tires. They're like, we're not, it's niche, we're just not doing it anymore. Maybe they needed more, they wanted to reuse the factory space for something else, who knows. And because of this, it broke Jim Street's heart so much, he hid the car in his barn because he didn't want anyone to see it without every single like bell and whistle he had designed for it.
I mean, couldn't he just have new ones made?
No, it was proprietary technology, and it involved spinning rubber inside of like hot rubber inside of a specific shell that would cast a thin enough non-layered tire that light could be seen through it. It was incredibly advanced technology for the 1950s and 60s. So from 1964 to 2018, which is 54 years, no one saw the car, and legends spread about what happened to it. It was destroyed. He was in a fit of rage. He tore it apart. It was reused for the Batman show, all these things. And in reality, it was just sitting in one of his barns, hidden away from the public, because if it wasn't perfect, he didn't want the world to see it.
And I assume it's not still there.
After his passing, they were going through his things, and they found this one of one custom show car sitting in there. And because of time, the fish scales had gone from silver, pearlescent, to gold.
Okay.
It was in such bad shape, it covered in bits of duct tape where rust had started to get at like the body on the top of it. It was in pretty rough shape. It was taken to auction in 2018 and bought by Claremont Collections.
I was really worried you were going to say Post Malone.
And he bought it. So originally the price was $75,000 in the 1950s, which is roughly $750,000 in today money, which is a lot, but there's Maseratis and Bugattis that cost far more. The barn find in its broken state sold for $385,000 in 2018 and took $200,000 more dollars to fully restore. And a lot of that went to custom fabricating one-of-one components that only existed for this car, and doing detective work and history work for when things were added during shows. Who manufactured those pieces? What was the methodology? Do they still do that, or do we need to find a new way to recreate these parts? It truly looks phenomenal, and the car still starts and runs.
So would this be the Sahara 3?
No, it's still called the Sahara 2 because they just remastered it, because they didn't add anything new to it.
Okay.
I would have expected, yeah, but when it's a museum, they kind of want to restore the past versus implementing the newest iteration. Whereas I think a Sahara 3 would probably be a full new car taken in that same style.
I mean, I would love to see that project.
It would be amazing to see. It's currently, you can see it in Chicago, Illinois, at the museum of this guy. He has plenty of one-of-one cars. That's why he bought it. Let me see here. So for the tires, it was really interesting. For the new tires they made, Goodyear obviously hasn't been making these tires since 1964. So they asked them, could you make them again? And they're like, I mean, maybe. So what they did is they took the tires that were on the car, the last remaining functional pair, probably not in great shape, rubber erodes, and actually it starts to return back to its natural state after time, where it starts to break down into goop.
Oh, yeah, because rubber is like a petroleum product, isn't it?
The same thing happens to a lot of like old like rubber accessories for cell phones and technology.
Mm.
So, but what they did is they took clear neourethane like dental rubber.
Oh.
And they put it over that, and they created a mold off of that, and then filled it with a custom show car. You should not drive this on the freeway because it won't last super long. Clear, like dental gel, like rubberized tires. And they, instead of white light, they have LEDs that can change color now.
Oh.
So all of the different colors Goodyear used to offer, instead of hot swapping the tires, they just can change on a whim.
Hearing about this definitely makes you want to be like
a classic car guy.
Well, just you want to be in a room with like you wish there was a show like almost in the style of Mythbusters where it's like or like a Trick My Truck if anyone remembers that, or like Pimp My Ride or something, where it's just the idea of let's like imagine people with like the skill and the production design to improve on vehicles, and you give them things like, hey, here's a beat up car from an auction, make it into like a crazy concept vehicle.
Here's a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
Make it the coolest thing that fits this description.
But I would totally love to see a show where people are making like just improving on cars to make them like, hey, this hasn't been done before, let's make a crazy vehicle and then sell it at auction and see how far we can go.
So this car, like I said, still sits in a museum. You can see it now. It doesn't travel anymore, but it runs, which is incredible. I love that this museum doesn't just have cars set up to go like to rot, but look pretty on the outside. They're actually maintaining the engines and the components. That's a level of care. Like that's what rich people should be doing is preserving history. That's phenomenal. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and also putting it in a place where people could come and see it.
Yeah, and so what? You maybe have to pay like $20 to go in. That's
because
worth it.
Because you're basically, the two fears are, one, it gets thrown in a museum, but it's basically stuffed and mounted as a showpiece.
Yeah.
Or it's in a private collection where
and no one ever sees it.
Yeah, and it might as well just be gone.
So some extra things I forgot to mention here as we kind of wrap around. It had on top of it, if you didn't want to use the steering column, if you didn't want to use your joystick, you could turn left and right by clicking what looked like mouse buttons on the hood. The back seats were a curved shape, and the center had a wine cooler in the back for chilling out,
I saw there was like something in the back, but I was figuring you're going to get to it, and I was picturing it being like, oh, this was the device that let you call people remotely.
No, it's for alcohol. Because you're taking a dame out on the drive. You want to show her the good time and give her the good wine.
You know what? That is the most of era. That's the thing that I should have was expecting from the get-go.
This is an 8 martini day, I'll tell you.
But everything else was just so far beyond. Like, I knew about the light-up tires. I'd heard about that being a thing.
That was what I originally was only doing research on, and then I discovered the Golden Sahara.
I didn't think there's like, oh, I think those light-up tires are neat. Come around to the back, it shoots fire.
Yeah.
And can self-drive to an extent.
Yeah, you could vocally through a microphone or through the use of a legitimate TV remote that had just mildly been changed.
Yeah.
The car ran on a gold-plated wide-block Lincoln V8 engine.
Of course the engine was gold-plated.
It's gorgeous. It is gorgeous. And let me just make sure I didn't miss any other fun little things. Yeah, so this was the car that was kind of the first custom car that Barris ever made, and it started his... I mean, he literally changed pop culture forever with his concept cars and then making one that really represented retrofuturism in the live action for the Batman 66 series.
Such a crazy...
Oh, yeah, they used 55 gallons of dental silicone to create the new tires.
Gee. It's always a weird story when you have to say 55 gallons of dental silicone.
Yeah, there's no normal story involving that number or that, like, combination of words.
I kind of want to set up, like, Google alerts for stuff like that. Just, like, weird combinations of...
So, if you're ever in Chicago, Illinois, check out that collection of cars. And I guess this brings us to kind of a silly question of whether or not these items, which are already in respective museums, belong in a museum.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say... outside of a museum, how would you sort of present this stuff? Because I was saying a biopic for the guy.
Oh, phenomenally. A George Barris or Jim Street biopic, or just kind of a Ford v. Ferrari story of the Golden Sahara being built and then implemented on and then lost and found again. That whole saga would be fascinating to me. But I think if I was going to just, like, are you saying if I couldn't keep the car in a museum, or if I just...
Well, no, like, just, it's already a museum. But I think it's safe to say that some of these things that we talk about have legacies that just you kind of want to just go out into the streets and tell people about.
I would straight up be basing, like, the Fantastic Car off of stuff like this. Like, I'm sure that we're going to see plenty of retrofuturism judging by that trailer, but I would be putting any excuse I have in a retrofuturistic setting. Even, what was the Russian Bioshock game, Atomic
Heart.
If they wanted to do something involving, like... Guys, don't worry, the Americans are here. We brought our Golden Sahara. Whoa, I almost got in a car accident. Luckily, my radar stopped. Would you like some wine? So that is the legendary real-world story of Heras 1 and 2, which inspired the Batmobile and were then later inspired by the Batmobile, and, in my opinion, went on to shape the Captain Nemo car from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh, yeah, visually.
As well as the Gadget-mobile from the live-action Inspector Gadget movies. You can really see the visual, like, the way this technology, this vision for the future, this creative implementation, the ideas of even adding all these bells and whistles to a car, I don't think we'd even have those if not for people who said, We're going to build what we can now, and we're also going to leave blueprints for the future so they can create the future that we won't get to live in. So I think this is phenomenally interesting and a wonderful part of history that proves that reality, as always, is stranger than fiction.